Welcome to Chapter 3 of Amy's Eyes, which is kind of a short one, and it starts with a riddle. Old Mother Twitchit has but one eye and a long tail which she can let fly, and every time she goes over a gap, she leaves a bit of her tail in a trap. The answer is apparently a needle and thread. Now, when Amy was 10 years old, a remarkable thing did happen. It changed her life forever. The captain had now been dragged about with Amy for 6 long years, so he looked to be the very grief of a doll. Not only was his sword gone, and all his brass buttons, but also his hat and his coat-tails. His fine blue uniform was scuffed and thin, his seams were split and parting, and his rag stuffing showed in several places. Amy observed this one day with a sort of surprise, for the captain seemed to her always bright and new and fresh, although he had been through a hard life as one of Napoleon's foot soldiers. She held him up high and turned him this way and that, like a baby, examining the damage. That same afternoon she sat on her bed, sewing at the captain's seams. She was alone. The other girls were outside playing in the sunlight. By and by, when she had zigzag-stitched her way around the captain's legs, arms, and torso, she studied his shabby head. After stitching in a new straight line for his mouth, and stringing some fresh yellow yarn for his hair, she considered his ears. "Your ears, dear," said Amy, "are falling off. Now we'll see to that." She took up her scissors. "This won't hurt at all. Here, I'll just carefully snip your ears off and sew them back on with a new thread." This she did. She held the captain's ears in her lap, and drew the old thread out of them, humming to herself. As she was narrowly concentrating on threading her needle, she spoke. "What were my father's ears like, Captain? I've never thought about his ears. I suppose people don't think about ears much, so that's the reason for that. Were they long, like clamshells? No? Were they round, like cauliflowers? No? Maybe tiny, like yours, and fuzzy all over?" Amy smiled and stuck the thread through the eye of the needle. "But I don't mean to say that your ears aren't beautiful. They are lovely ears. Here, you may look at them." She held them up before the captain's button eyes. "Oh, Captain," she said, delighted with an idea, "how many people in the whole world have seen their own ears in front of their eyes? That is special, isn't it?" She knotted her thread and pulled it through one of the captain's ears. "But of course you can't hear until I get your ears back on your head." She sewed one on and picked up the other. As she was ready to make the first stitch, she shifted her place on the bed, bumped her elbow on the bedstead, and thrust the needle deep into the captain's head. "Ouch!" said the captain. Amy dropped the ear on the floor and yanked the needle out of his head. He appeared to blink, but it happened so quickly she was not sure if she had blinked or if the captain had. She looked closely. The captain's eyes were wet. Amy touched a finger to one of the buttons and then touched her tongue and tasted it. It tasted of salt tears. The captain was alive, and he was crying from the poke of the needle. Well, children in orphanages are ready for such wonders. And should it be so surprising anyway? Suppose you are talked to all the time as the captain was, and read to out of books, and hugged and loved constantly, and told the most secret things. Even a bundle of rags might respond to that. Certainly a doll would. And then stick a needle or a pin in its head, and you might be surprised if it didn't yell. Then, with just a little coaxing, you might even start a conversation. There is, therefore, no doubt about what happened next. In a very short while the captain and Amy were talking about the remarkable thing that had happened. After the wonder and joy of it had been expressed by both of them, the captain considered the case in detail. "I always was alive, in a sort of way, Sis." The captain had begun calling Amy Sis right off. "I could see everything, and hear everything. And when I was caught in a closing door, I could feel it. Or when dropped from a window, I wanted to yell," the captain said. "But it was different then, in such a way as this. Now I am alive, and right here, very close to you and the world. Yet before you stuck the needle in my head, I was just as alive. But it seemed like I was 1,000 miles away. It was that poke with the needle that brought me to this place. Can you understand that?" Amy tried to understand, and she thought she understood it well enough. Anyway, since the captain always had been alive, even in that other sort of way, Amy and he had much to talk about, since everything was in common to them. The captain having been seldom away from Amy's touch. But for the first 4 years in the shoebox, the captain remembered nothing. But as for the first 4 years in the shoebox, the captain remembered nothing. Nothing of a social nature, anyway. "I blame no one for that," the captain said, "and it gave me time to think, and I thought about the sea and ships, and studied what I was thinking. Then I thought about the stars, and how they go across the sky, and how the sun moves and the seasons change, and how you can find your way about the sea by knowing these things. And I thought about the wind and sea currents, and clouds and weather and seabirds and turtles that swim 1,000 miles without stopping. And I thought about the many different kinds of fish that there are, and about sails and ropes and brass fittings and the North Star and the Southern Cross. Oh, there was a lot to think about, sis. For you see, I was learning my trade. I sailed all around the world in my mind, along the coasts of continents, across great oceans, and I visited South Sea Islands. I don't doubt that, at all that I could take a ship to sea right now and sail it around the world if I'd a mind to." The captain grew thoughtful. "But from where I remember all these things, I don't know." He smiled. "But I wasn't so very lonely, even in the shoebox, sis. I dreamed about you. And I dreamed I saw you growing up and running about St. Anne's. I dreamed about you too, Captain. Sometimes I dreamed about you standing on a sailing ship." "Now that's just exactly a dream I had many times," said the captain. "Well, we are twins, you know, both of us finished up on the very same day. Yes, even that I can remember. And I heard your first crying out. We came into the world together, and it might be that we can have the same dreams." "And you say you remember our father?" "Clearly. Do you want to hear about him again?" Amy nodded. "A straight and honest man, hair like straw and a happy face, bright eyes, like young hazelnuts. Not a big man, but not small, very sure hands, delicate fingers, like a musician. But of course you know he was a tailor, and tailors have a nice touch. He held you up in the air and loved you like the sunshine, sis. And then our mother." The captain looked at the floor sadly. "I never knew her. She was very sick in those days. I remember there was a beautiful blue dress on a hanger near her bedroom door, with pearl blue buttons down the front. There were flowers in the window she had picked. Your father kept a lamp lit all night long. Then one day the flowers were gone." He sat silent for a moment. But enough of that. The next thing was that we were swinging to and fro in a basket. You may be sure that our mother was watching over us." He paused. "I hear a mouse." "A mouse?" "A mouse. I hear a mouse walking. Quiet. Yes, it's a mouse. There. Now I hear it sniffing." "But there is no mouse," said Amy. "Just the two of us. Are you feeling all right, Captain?" "It's on the floor. I hear its toenails clicking." Amy looked over the side of the bed. There on the floor, next to the captain's fallen ear, was a mouse. It dashed to the wall and scampered away when Amy moved. She picked up the ear and began sewing it back on the captain's head. "What a very strange thing," said Amy. "Now, does this hurt?" "Not those little stitches, but that stab in the head is something I wouldn't like to happen again." "How curious, that your ear could hear when it was on the floor." "Most anything could be expected now, I suppose. And I wouldn't think it was a piece of thread that connected ears with hearing, anyway." Yes, I suppose you could leave me here and carry my ears around in your pocket, and I could hear everything that happened no matter where you went." "That's an awful thing to say, Captain. What would happen if I lost them when I was playing, and a bird flew off with them to line her nest? Then you'd hear nothing for the rest of your life except the peeping of chicks." The captain then told about the first night inside the gate of St. Anne's, and about the big dog, with the long legs, and how the ladies took Amy in. Next came the 4 years in the shoebox, the captain learning his trade, and Amy learning to walk and talk. After that they were together again, and now they talked, laughed, and remembered things all afternoon. When another child would now and then come into the dormitory, Amy hummed, and the captain was silent. When at last the girls gathered together, awaiting the call to clean up for supper, Amy sat on the edge of her bed with the captain in her lap, turning his head this way and that so he might not miss any of the more interesting trouble or fights. You can always find a fight in an orphanage, or some small tragedy off in a corner. From wash-up time to bedtime, there was no more chance to talk with the captain. Amy dared only to wish him a single good night. "Good night, Captain. Good night, Sis." And they slept. Amy had dreams that all happened under a bright blue sky filled with white birds, and a sun that sang with light and warmth over the great rolling ocean. And that is the end of chapter 3.